Welcome back to my Discovery 2 LS Swap instructional video series. In this video, we're going to remove the original Rover engine. Let's get into it. So, first of all, I apologize. This engine already has the heads removed. I thought this was going to be a head gasket job until I discovered they had a cracked block. So, I've already unplugged a lot of things and removed the heads and just stopped there. Thankfully, there's an Atlantic British video on how to do head gaskets. You can follow that and then come back to this video once you have the heads off. Atlantic British even has a video on removing the entire engine, so you can follow their video too. With that, I'm just going to keep disconnecting and removing things until this thing is out of here. It's really not complicated to remove an engine because, you don't have to worry about much. Just remove stuff. But don't cut anything. Don't cut any wires. Keep everything intact. Try to move it cleanly. We need a couple sensors off the engine. We need the coolant temperature sensor and the oil pressure sensor. And it's nice to have the wiring harness intact so you can fully understand what you need to do when it comes to modifying it. But other than that, what's left to do here is disconnect the lower radiator hose, remove the radiator. Looks like I want to remove the exhaust manifolds. I have to disconnect them from the Y pipe just so they're out of the way. The power steering pump. I still have a few wires and sensors to disconnect. Anything you see that is connected to your wiring harness, you're going to want to disconnect. I just disconnected the high pressure hose from the power steering pump and pulled it out with the entire bracket. Our high pressure fitting will fit right back into our Corvette power steering pump. Therefore, you should keep it intact and in good condition. We're going to reuse this return hose as well, or you can buy a new one if you want to have new stuff. There's one wire that goes all the way down in there. Maybe a NOx sensor. Maybe I'm going to start getting rid of coolant hoses. So I'm going to disconnect the lower radiator hose, which is going to make a big mess. So I'm going to put a big bin under here, try and catch all that. And Rover uses a lot of these spring-loaded clamps on their coolant hoses, and you might be inclined to get rid of them and replace them with worm clamps, but I would say don't, because the worm clamps are more likely to leak and damage your hoses, while these are very, very leak-free, while also being inexpensive compared to some of the high-end options. So get yourself a pair of ratcheting hose clamp pliers, and you can take them off with ease. Don't get rid of any of your coolant hoses because you might want to reuse them. These heater hoses that go to the heater core, we're not going to be able to reuse them because they're rigid. We're just going to get flexible rubber ones, so we can just remove them and get them out of the way. The hose clamp removal kit also came with these kinds of tools to help you remove stuck-on hoses. Much better. Cool. Pretty soon I'll be able to remove this entire coolant hose assembly all together, all at once. Pliers are super handy. Even with the right tools, they can be a little bit frustrating to get off. So imagine if you don't have the right tools. This tiny little hose that comes out of the water pump, the really short hose. We're not going to reuse that, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it so we can move on. Okay, we're going to probably reuse the hose that's coming down from the coolant reservoir, so I'm going to disconnect it over here. There we go. Okay, now I feel like removing the radiator will give me some room. Couple of tips. Before you take anything apart, take some pictures so you can see where everything is. And as you're unplugging stuff, Doesn't hurt to label it if with some with some painter's tape. So when it comes to rework the wiring harness, you know what it is. Right now I'm using some actual wire labels to label my oil pressure sensor plug. And there's also some sort of coolant temperature sensor in the radiator. I'm going to label that before I unplug it, because a lot of them look similar and I don't want to mix them up. Okay, I'd like to get the radiator out of the way. I think it's just taking out these two 10mm bolts, and then we can wiggle it out of its mounts, if I recall correctly. Let's see. We're going to reuse this radiator unless you have other plans. So keep everything intact. Take some pictures of how the radiator was installed, because this mount can be a little confusing sometimes. So that turned out to be a lie. There's more to it than just these bolts. You also have to remove the Phillips head screws, 2 on each side, 1 here, 1 down there. And then we'll be able to wiggle the radiator out of this plastic bracketry, and then we'll be able to remove this plastic bracket completely. I'm using a Phillips head screwdriver on the ratchet. You can also use a stubby Phillips head screwdriver. Okay, maybe with the help of a little flathead screwdriver for prying, you can pry down here to get the radiator separated from this big plastic bracket. Down here, the radiator just slides onto it. So we need to slide it out. There we go. See that? Got it to slide out, and then the bracket can come off. You can also pull this piece of side shroud. And my favorite way to remember where stuff goes is to just take screws and bolts and put them right where they were. So these Phillips head screws were holding that side shroud to this plastic bracket, right? So I'm just going to put them right back in there. Same with these 10mm bolts. I'm going to put them back on the radiator there. Depending on your model year of Discovery, you might have 1 or 2 coolers behind the radiator. We have 1 on this 2004, but if you have 2, one of them is an oil cooler, and one of them is a transmission fluid cooler. We don't need an oil cooler for the LS, so you can remove that and you won't reuse it. But we may want to reuse it for the transmission lines. So for the transmission lines, you have options. You could buy a new transmission cooler that has AN fittings, and you can zip tie it to your radiator, and then run new AN lines to your transmission, right? Or you can keep this radiator here, and we'll just modify the transmission lines so they can get there. Either way, we want to disconnect the transmission cooler from the radiator so that we can remove the radiator without the trans cooler. Up to you. You could also disconnect the transmission cooler. If you do that, you'd be draining your transmission lines. I'm not going to drain my transmission lines just yet because I want to experiment and see if it's absolutely necessary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the transmission cooler from the radiator, and what I see is that there's 1 Phillips head screw on this side. So I'm going to remove that, and then on here there's a metal tab that goes into a plastic slot on the rad. So all it takes is to remove this 1 screw. Okay. Now I can wiggle the transmission cooler out of there. When deciding whether you want to keep this transmission cooler or buy a new one, evaluate the condition of it. Mine looks a little bit corroded and is kind of crumbling when I touch it, so I'll have to take a closer look. Okay. Got it. Okay. Now my radiator can come out. Okay. I feel like most of what I want to do is under the vehicle now, so I might go there. I'm gonna detach this knock sensor wire. I'm gonna um, unhook any transmission cooler lines that are clamped to the engine. I'm gonna unbolt the engine mounts and those exhaust manifolds. Alright guys, I'm under the car. No fancy two-post lift. I'm gonna remove the exhaust bolts, the nuts. I mean, those are 13mm, using an impact gun on both sides. Then I'm gonna remove this plastic splash guard. Ah! Dang, because of the stupid racket, man. Stupid racket. Ah! Oh, how long have you been recording? Alright, back under the car. Let me show you what I've been up to. I got the splash guard off. That was just a pain in the butt to wiggle it out, but it comes out through here, through the back. I've got all the exhaust manifold nuts removed, so we should be able to pull those out from up above. Engine mount nuts removed, so the engine's just sitting there. I've got to trace the transmission lines, disconnect them anywhere that they are attached to the engine. I've got to disconnect the starter wires. I already disconnected this knock sensor wire, but it's also attached to the engine with the bracket, so I gotta get that. Yoink! And this one too. Oh no! I left the bolt on there. So I've made quite a bit of progress down under. Let's see. By the starter, I've disconnected the starter wires. I was able to push this heat shield off, remove the one nut, remove the wires. Here they are. There was a knock sensor by the starter right there. See that? Unplug that. Our transmission cooler lines are all loose. Wiring harness is loose. There's only a couple things left to get this engine out. All right, we can get our entire wiring harness out of the way. I think it's still hooked up to the O2 sensors back there, but those don't really get in our way that much, so I'm gonna leave them plugged in so that and just get the engine out, and it'll be easier to reach with the engine out. So maybe I'll have to remove the oil filter to clear that. I was not able to see the torque converter bolts through the starter hole, but apparently there's a plug here which is designed so you can have a straight shot at those torque converter bolts. So pull the plug, and it's really hard to see through there. Maybe with a folding mirror I could see if I have a straight shot at the bolt, or I could just feel it. Oh, I feel that. I feel a bolt, so we're almost there. I just need to turn the engine just a tad bit more. And so there's 4 bolts up there, so every time I get a bolt out, we're going to have to turn the engine 90 degrees to get the next one. I got to all the bolts with this. That's a 13mm. They were very tight. There's definitely some thread lock on them. There's some easier ways to do it. If you drop the oil pan, you can get to those bolts a lot easier. All that's left to do now is get all of the bell housing bolts. 2 here. 1 here. There's also one on this side, going that way. Same on the driver's side. So get to what you can with the tools that you have, and try to do all the bottom ones from the bottom, and then we'll get to the top. Okay, I got those 2 bottom ones. There was one here from the other side, one there from the other side, and one here from this side. And this is, the other side is similar. So if we flip around, let's see, we got one here, if you can see that. One there, right behind the transmission cooler lines. Nothing that's, and then one, of course, up there that we might get to with an extension or a wobble socket. Okay, I think I got all the bell housing bolts I could get to underneath. All that's missing is the top ones, but before I take those off, I'm going to go ahead and bring the crane over and attach to the engine. There's my crane in position. I've attached it to the head bolts. Hopefully you kept your head bolts. If not, they are 716-14. I know that now because I had to go chase some down. So I've attached it in 4 points. Now is also a good time to remove the hood. That's super easy. You just need to remove 2 bolts on each side and disconnect this hose. And it's pretty light. 2 people can lift it away. All right, the hood is off. There's a little bit of tension on the crane. And there's one thing I almost forgot to do. I like to put a jack under the transmission just to keep it up so it doesn't come crashing down when we pull the engine out. Now, the top bell housing bolts, there's one down there, one here, one there, maybe one over there. Not super easy to get to. Not super easy to... Definitely putting a socket is nearly impossible. And putting a wrench at an angle kind of works, but they're tight. It's not easy. So one thing we can do, I'll demonstrate just to make it easier. We put tension on this, we lift the engine a bit, remove the engine mounts completely, and then we can lower the engine further and get to those bolts. To remove each engine mount bracket, it's on 10mm bolt up here and one 15mm head down below. They're pretty tight though. The bracket on this side is gone easy. On this side I had some trouble, so instead I undid the big 18mm nut holding the engine mount to the bracket. So that's also good. I just need to lift the engine a little bit so I can get the mount, there we go, completely out. And now we can gently lower the motor, being careful not to pinch any transmission lines or anything like that. But I've already made a little bit more room back there. See if I can do a little more. There we go. Lots of extra space in the back now. Plenty of room for a wrench. I went and lowered it even more, see, and now I have ample room to put my socket and get those bolts out. There's 1, 2, 3 down there, maybe another one over there. I haven't looked at yet. On the passenger side, there is a sneaky bell housing bolts behind this orange plug, holding the bracket in place a little bit, so I have to go find it. All right, all the bell housing bolts are out except for one, which I've left slightly threaded in for safety, and I'll remove it at the end. The jack is back under the transmission. I lifted the engine a little bit. Now the only thing holding the two together is some friction from the dowel pins. So I'm gonna find a good place to pry between the engine and transmission and see if I can get them separated. And if this takes a lot of effort, then that means I probably forgot a bolt somewhere. So I did indeed forget a bolt. There's one behind this orange connector. Do you see that orange connector? Yeah. So behind that, so you gotta get the orange connector out of the way. It's clipped onto a thing. Man. And there's a bolt right behind it. Okay. Tough one. Okay, it was a battle, but I got that last bolt out. So we're loose now. This is our crankshaft position sensor plug. We should disconnect that. There we go. This is easily the hardest part of the swap, just getting the stupid motor out. I missed yet another bolt. You see where these pipes are coming in? There's a little metal bracket and there's a bolt holding it, which is a bell housing bolt as well, so that needs to come out. I'm pretty sure that's the last one. So the best place to start prying is down below, because there's a weep hole under the bell housing where you can stick a screwdriver and get them separated a little bit. Because once you get it started in the bottom, then it becomes easier to come in here and pry the top a little bit. We'll go over to the passenger side, pry on that side as well. Right, stick our tool. There we go. There we go. They're loose. good idea to put something in front of your condenser. You don't accidentally damage it with your engine as you take it out. We did it. It's out. This is what we're left with. Okay, I'm going to continue by extracting a couple more things. I'm going to clean this up by removing the wiring harness completely. Okay, looks like oxygen sensors. This can be easily unplugged here. Well, easily. See about that. We will not be using the Rover oxygen sensor, so if you end up cutting them, I don't blame you or anything. So that was driver's side, now passenger side. Oh. Yeah, so we just have some wires going back behind the transmission. I'm gonna lower the transmission now, get that jack under there, and take a closer look. So one of the O2 sensors is connected here on the transfer case. Try to pull that plug off. Cool. And then the other O2 sensor wire goes over the transfer case. Okay, I was able to remove the connector of this O2 sensor from its mount, so now that will make it easier to disconnect it. I will probably need two hands and have to put the camera down for this though. Okay, now I just gotta go through and just disconnect anywhere that the wiring harness is zip tied or attached in some way. Pretty sure the wire should be loose. Just one zip tie. I'm gonna break off from here. There we go. And here it comes. Okay, the wiring harness is just kind of roped in to these battery and alternator cables. So we'll separate that later, but for now we're just gonna disconnect those two bulkhead connectors in the fuse box here. Let's get those out. Okay. Cool. There's a ground wire plugged in here. Get that. Yep. Got that. Okay. Finally. So, now the only thing left is to disconnect wires at the ECU inside the vehicle. So now I'm gonna come under here, pop this cardboard panel, and I wanna finish getting the wiring harness out. So there's our ECU. There's the grommet. We gotta get this side panel off as well, which is just a couple of clips that can be unscrewed, ideally using a flathead screwdriver. Okay, now we simply disconnect all the ECU connectors in order. That one, then this one. So you push the button, pull the lever up, and the connector comes right out. Super easy. And that's all of the cables coming out of that grommet. Cool. And the final step we're going to pinch the grommet from here, from the engine bay side, pull it out. I'm popping that grommet out of its hole. Yep. And then carefully pull out each individual ECU connector. And done. There's the Rover wiring harness fully out. We'll set it aside for the next video. Looking for anything else we can clean out of this engine bay. Secondary air intake stuff. This whole pump can go. You can get rid of this completely because we will not be needing it. Goodbye, secondary air. Lastly, make sure you extract and keep the oil pressure switch right here over the oil filter and the Rover coolant temperature sensor. I think it's this above on the lower intake, so make sure to remove that. We're going to put it on the LS engine. Alright guys, this feels like a good stopping point for the video. Hopefully you had fun watching me struggle and get dirty. Thanks for watching. Until next time.